Greetings, friends, and welcome to another Daily Author Talk. I am your host, Jacob, or Author, or whatever you want to call me that isn't derogatory or anything like that. I'd certainly appreciate that. I hope you guys are doing well this fine day, whatever time it is for you. Day, night, middle of the night, sneaking on the computer without your mama knowing. Austin, if you're watching, that's going to be another immediate throwback. I've said that before in previous videos. It's always a fun time. But yeah, I just thought I'd like to start this with a bit of a check-in. Just let me know how you guys are doing. Just how's life treating you? Is it good? If it's good, that's awesome. If you got something good going on in life, feel free to let me know. And if things are rough, then, well, I think any of us can understand. Maybe you're going through some sort of circumstance that many of us won't understand, but we're all humans. We all kind of feel the same range of emotion and things like that. We all understand what it is to struggle. We understand what it is to grieve, to just feel down on ourselves, and you know what? I just hope this episode picks you up just a little bit, because that's exactly what this show is for. It's just a nice, casual, relaxed time to, you know, enjoy each other's company and just have a nice talk. Lately, I've been sort of struggling a little bit creatively, and it's an odd struggle. I feel like anyone who's done any sort of creative work, or not, maybe it doesn't have to apply to creative work, it can apply to anything else, but I feel like it's something a lot of people can understand. When I write my books, I feel this yearning, sort of, to write the way I used to. Like, in my brain, I have this image of myself as a child who, you know, had limited access to the internet. Excuse me. I've been drinking coffee, so got that gas buildup in my chest. I had limited access to the internet. I had limited access to video games. And this was completely understandable on my parents' part. It was, you know, to help me focus, because they knew how much I enjoyed video games, and I feel like even before the internet blew up, they knew how much of a distraction it could be, especially with the rise of YouTube. My goodness. I did way too much procrastinating as a child because of YouTube, and it was back when it was still new. It wasn't even the big phenomenon it is today, but I just look up video game music and would listen to that instead of writing my book or something. But anyway, as a child, I had a big fascination with video games, and the first video game I remember playing, or the first video game I remember making me want to pursue storytelling as a creative field, was The Legend of Zelda on the original NES. And I have very vivid visions of playing that game as a kid. I don't remember if I ever got far, but I remember exploring the overworld. I remember very vividly exploring the desert for some reason. I don't know why the desert always comes to mind, but I think as a kid I was just really fascinated with how they were able to portray a desert via 8-bit graphics. You know, they just put the same flat kind of beigey color of the rest of the overworld, surrounded it with brown cliffs, and then just put little dots around it, and I thought that was so fascinating for some reason. And I feel like I found the scenery more fascinating than the levers that would pop out of the ground and come at you. Maybe just as a kid I didn't really bother thinking about the enemies that much. But anyway, the idea of a game like The Legend of Zelda fascinated me to no end. And I think it's because of The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings is one of the first movies I remember watching, ironically, even though as a kid I did kind of find it boring as hell because of how long the movies were, but I really appreciated the story. I loved the fantastical elements of seeing living magic, basically. Of seeing elves, of seeing hobbits, of seeing orcs, dwarves, and just all these incredible set pieces as well. Like, freaking, I don't know what they did to make New Zealand look like magic, but they did it, and it was amazing. But I was just endlessly fascinated by the idea of a story that takes place in such a fantastical setting, and that fascination transferred to my appreciation for The Legend of Zelda. Because when I played The Legend of Zelda, I didn't just see a bunch of pixels on the screen while I go ahead and press a button. I was witnessing that adventure as if it was Lord of the Rings. I was imagining what it would be like to be Link, to be some kid out in the wilderness with nothing but a wooden sword and a little dinky shield on your side, fighting off hordes of monsters with very little allies to actually help you, but allies nonetheless, all to, rescue Princess Zelda and restore the Triforce, basically. And I imagined this all as such a fascinating scenario, and because of my limited access to video games, it started making me wonder, well, if I'm so fascinated with these kinds of stories, why don't I go ahead and create my own? And that's exactly what I set out to do. I started writing comics when I was around 5 or 6 years old. I would do these really crude drawings of they were basically fanfic comics. I would basically do my own story scenarios for both the Mario and the Zelda series, because even though we had a PlayStation back then, it was mostly Nintendo games we played growing up. We had a PS1, an NES, and at one point a Super Nintendo, but my memories of the Super Nintendo aren't quite as vivid as mine of the PS1 and NES. But I would draw these little fanfic comics of Mario and Zelda, and of them going through stories of my own creation, and they would take inspiration from other pieces of media I had seen and things like that. And eventually I started wondering, well, okay, this is all fine and good, but what if I did this without the drawing? What if I could just tell my story? And it was around this time that I was getting a little further into elementary school. I think I was in maybe 3rd grade at this point, and I started getting really into books. And I mean, I wouldn't have believed it a few years later when I kind of basically abandoned books because school makes them boring, but I was really into reading, and Harry Potter in particular was something I really enjoyed reading. And just so everyone knows, trans rights, I will forever speak that, screw J.K. Rowling. But I did enjoy reading the Harry Potter books as a kid, and same for other stories along those lines. Matilda was another story I was really fascinated with. Just this idea of children with magical abilities being able to, outsmart the adults and be able to rise above societal expectations of what children are able to do. And as a kid, I just really liked that idea, especially since I was in that age group. So I enjoyed writing those kinds of same stories. I wrote my own novel series, or it started out as a comic book when I was still a little younger. I wrote multiple comic books along the same, chronicling the adventures of a kid thrust into another world, or a group of kids thrust into another world. It was basically an isekai before the genre really blew up, but it was inspired by the Bone comics by, oh my gosh, I can't remember his name. I'll have to look it up later and I'll put it on screen. It's Jeff something. I can't think of his last name, but that I loved the Bone comics as a kid, and I was so surprised by the story too. It was just so fascinating, and seeing these, bone creatures stumble into this whole fantasy universe that just seemed to have no place in the world that they knew, and end up becoming the heroes of this land, and it was just an insane story. And I hope they eventually make a cartoon adaptation, because I know the author of the comics has been wanting to do that, and Netflix, I think, at one point promised they would do it, but then they just basically ghosted him or something like that. But regardless, because of those comics, I started making my own chronicle stories of a bunch of kids entering this fantasy universe and needing to help fight in it, basically, and then just kind of adapting and living in it. And then that eventually transferred into a novel series, which I'm still technically working on to this day. I have never finished that series. And in fact, instead of writing it as a book, I am turning that original story into a video game. Only it's not an isekai anymore. It's the main characters already live in the world, so I'm foregoing that extra addition of them coming in from the real world into this fantasy universe. But regardless, I guess I forgot my original point here. I think I was talking about my original vision of writing as a kid. So, yeah, I went ahead and told you my whole life story, basically. You're welcome. But as a kid, because of my limited access to video games, I would write all the damn time. And I didn't care about the quality. I was just excited to enter these fantasy universes and, basically hang out with the characters I created. And it was super fun. And then I grew up and got burnt out. And what happened there? I think a lot of authors who maybe started out at a young age understand that. Or just any of you guys. Like, any of you guys start something that you were really passionate about as a kid, and then once you got all grown up and stuff, you just kind of got burnt out of it. Like, I'm sure you guys understand. And that's sort of my creative dilemma. I have this perfect vision of me as a kid just writing endlessly for hours because I enjoyed the process so much, and then I just stopped writing as consistently because I got tired and expected perfection out of myself. And I think that's the lesson to take from this. When we're kids, we don't care so much about perfection. We just do it for the purity of actually taking that action and, getting in there to do it. And I think that's something we as adults could learn. Being a perfectionist is the single most detrimental thing we could deal with, basically, in any field. Because, a lot of people argue, being a perfectionist means you get it right the first time. Yes and no. Because when you're a perfectionist, if it's not right the first time, your brain goes, there's no point to doing this at all. So, why don't we just stop being a perfectionist, do the damn work, and enjoy ourselves in the meantime? I really could have gotten in more detail if I didn't spend the entire episode rambling about my childhood, but you know what? Maybe we'll talk a bit more about perfectionism in a later episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys have any other experiences like that or anything you'd like to talk about, let me know in the comments, and I will see you all next time.